Okay, it's noon, April 15th. So hello and welcome everybody to the National Health Federation's monthly Zoom. I'm your host, Alex Landry, with my co-host, Charlie Frohman. Charlie, can you believe that we've been doing this third Friday monthly Zoom for 16 months in a row?
16 months. Wow, time does fly. It's been entertaining and hopefully impactful.
Yes. It sure has. And it's so great for our president, Scott Tips, to be joining us. It's one of our speakers today. And I'm checking right now to see if the other speakers and guests are here.
I see Victoria from Congressman Posey's office.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thanks. And I see Dr. Spreen is there, one of our mainstays. Hi, Alan.
And here's
Marcia. I don't recognize you from before, but welcome.
Marcia's one of our newest.
Just signed up.
Yeah, yep. I just spoke at Marcia's group on Tuesday, so really happy to be here.
Okay.
Good to be here, everyone.
All right.
Has Diane Miller arrived, Alex?
I don't think so, but Greg Glaser just entered the meeting. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, Greg.
Good morning. Hi.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Scott. Although this is the second time I've seen you this morning. First time was on the cover of this magazine.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. You've seen the hard copy before I have, so you're way ahead of me.
Yeah.
What magazine is that, Greg?
I'm jealous.
It's one of the perks of being an NHF Counsel. I don't reveal how I get things.
You're mentioned in it on the masthead. To answer Charlie's question for you, it's believe it or not, the winter 2021 issue finally came out after it was kind of a jinxed issue and was held up on the press and being completed for a number of reasons. One was that my mother died during the time that I was working on the magazine. The other is Bill Sardi died while I was working on the magazine. And the other was we were working on what's on the cover of that issue, getting David Noakes out of French prison. And so those three things were kind of the perfect storm, plus all the travel it entailed, were the perfect storm to keep me from getting it out on time as I'd wished. But we're hoping to have the spring issue in everyone's hands by, oh, thank you for that. Have the spring issue in everyone's hands by May. So we'll catch up with the spring issue with our schedule. Hopefully, that's the plan. Anyway, what was just shown is the cover. Did you do that, Alex?
I did. Yeah, I just pulled it up.
Thank you.
I'll pull it up again.
That was very clever. And it just shows David Noakes and me standing in front of it's kind of hard to describe because I guess it's the main entrance of the Palais de Justice in Paris. And it's an old building that's right across the river from the, well, it's on the same island as the Notre Dame Cathedral, but it's kind of across from where I was staying to attend these trials. But anyway, this is after the decision had been announced and David was free to leave to go back home to the UK. And so it was a happy moment for him, even though it wasn't a declaration of innocence by the appellate court, unfortunately. And this picture here, if you stay on that page, Alex, it shows, well, it shows, okay, David and his son, Andrew. Andrew was a phenomenal fundraiser for David's legal defense fund. And then to the right is a picture after I waited for about 2.5, 3 hours for David to be released from prison that day. Well, this was the December 13th one. I picked him up and he immediately wanted to stop in a pub and have a beer because he hadn't had one in a very long time. So that's where that picture's from.
That is great. I gotta say that's one of my favorites. Being in prison unjustly is a lot to try a man's soul. And to have a friend right there to be receiving, that's a very good thing that you did, Scott.
And
Yeah,
hopefully,
thank you, Greg, for saying that.
and hopefully we'll get into a discussion with Diane Miller on pushing back to expand our protections to try natural and other healing modalities that aren't popular with some of the mainstream controllers of the government. And Scott, if okay, we'll move to an immediate threat to health freedom, the ever continuing vaccine mandates. And for those following it closely, the Food and Drug Administration and soon the Centers for Disease Control are going to consider an application from Pfizer, and then after that, of course, Moderna, to extend the emergency authorization for their COVID shots for our younger kids. Right now, the emergency authorization extends down to 6-year-olds, and assuming the rubber stamp committees at those bureaucracies okay the extension, we'll have toddlers as young as 6 months taking these increasingly dangerous shots. And we have a campaign whose link I'll put in chat for folks to ask their members of Congress to co-sign a letter that was just drafted by Congressman Posey's office, as well as Congressman Gov't, who is the author of our other campaign to allow refusal of any federally related vaccine and also require study of the unvaccinated to highlight the comparison around chronic disease, where the unvaccinated have 1,000% less chronic disease. And the third co-author is Congressman Duncan, who's on the key committee overseeing the FDA, the Energy and Commerce Committee. So with those three members of Congress, the campaign that we have that I'll put in chat tries to get co-signers for that letter that will go from Congress, members of Congress, over to FDA and CDC, urging them not to extend the shot to our youngest kids, our toddlers. And Victoria, I think you have a few words to say about that letter to encourage the audience to get behind this campaign, and I'll put the campaign in chat.
Yes, thank you. So as Charles said, Congressman Posey, who I work with, along with other members of Congress, is circulating a letter that we just drafted for signatures to send to the CDC and the FDA that raises these serious questions and concerns about administering the COVID-19 vaccines to children as healthy as 6 months old now. Pfizer and Moderna are both seeking emergency use authorization for these vaccines for children 6 months old. And Congressman Posey is very concerned about this. We know that the vaccine has caused myocarditis in children and adults, and it may have other long-term adverse effects that we're still unaware of and the FDA is unaware of. These vaccines don't have any long-term safety data. Many children have already had natural immunity, and they've been found to develop strong antibody responses after COVID-19 infection, even more so than adults. And those who are infected with COVID-19 have a 99.95% chance of survival, and they have an extremely low hospitalization rate. We believe that the FDA approval of these vaccines that have also been shown to have extremely low efficacy rate in children may pose more risk than benefit. So we're asking other members of Congress to join us in signing this letter and sending it to the FDA and CDC. And we would really appreciate if you would like to sign on. Thank you.
Excellent, Victoria. And so folks, just copy the link in chat, send your letter to your congressman asking him or her to co-sign this letter. They know the drill. The staffer, if interested, will just contact Victoria in Mr. Posey's office to add their boss's name to the letter. It takes just a minute to scroll down to the bottom of our campaigns. You could read about it there with footnotes. Just input your zip code and wham, up pops your letter and you push send. It's pretty standard. You just do that for all our campaigns. Greg, the Human Vaccine Encyclopedia, Counsel for National Health Federation and a couple other groups. Do you want to give a quick comment on the importance of getting Congress involved in what really is just a rubber stamp process over at the bureaucracies owned by Pharma?
Sure. The bureaucracies owned by Pharma are obviously conflicted, and we've documented that well. But when Congress gets involved to put pressure on these alphabet agencies, it actually has an effect, because the alphabet agencies receive their funding from Congress and also can be investigated by Congress. And so this is an excellent campaign that NHF has to bring awareness from top congressional representatives like Congressman Posey. And so this is the kind of letter that will create an effect, especially as we bring more congressmen to sign, because there is strength in coalitions. And also, I will add that the measure here to vaccinate babies is insane. And it's crazy from many levels. First is this whole premise of the PCR, that we're counting COVID tests. Even that's fundamentally flawed to set policy. And then from there, you have, as Victoria correctly highlighted, the death rate among the very young is so small that that death rate is outweighed by the risk of the vaccine itself. So when the risk of the vaccine is greater than the risk of the disease, and the risk of that disease is based on the PCR test, which is fundamentally flawed anyway, then what you have is you're using young people to try to protect old people. That's bizarre. That's a bizarre policy, to sacrifice the young in order to quote unquote save the old. And are the old actually being saved when the young get vaccinated? No, because as we know, getting vaccinated does not stop transmission. That's been widely recognized. And so it's the flawed paradigm from every angle that we look at this. And this letter that is drafted by these congressmen is such a it's a thoughtful presentation. It is conventional, I would say, in its approach. And so I think it's well calculated to be received by these alphabet agencies. And the effect of it, I think, will create the larger dialogue around the issues that I just highlighted, which is the bigger picture.
Victoria, how well have you enjoyed the process working with Sue Ann and Will in our other friendly offices in drafting this letter? Do you see a sense of hope and for good results from this effort?
Yeah, I think it's been great. And I think, like Greg was saying, that we wrote it in a way that it will be well received. So hopefully it will be, and we'll see.
And the letter has been farmed out to, I think, the legislative directors for a lot of the offices, and the importance of NHF supporters sending our sample email is like artillery in a battle. You're just lobbing the issues into all 435 members of Congress and 100 senators, so that they're at least aware of the issue. And then if you have any fence sitters, you never know when a staffer is going to bite. It's going to push this up the chain to their LD, chief of staff, counsel, and finally the boss. So Victoria, thanks so much. If folks don't know, Mr. Posey is a great friend for health freedom and vaccine risk awareness. He's the guy half a decade ago that spoke on the floor with the documents from Bill Hooker and William Thompson, the whistleblower at CDC, which found higher autism among especially minority boys from the MMR shot. And that whistleblower still works at CDC, and no one has done anything with the documents. So it's a crying sore in broad daylight that no one's touching. And even before that, Mr. Posey had a bill years ago, and Scott will remember this, with Congresswoman Maloney, the top Democrat on the Oversight Committee, requiring that comparison study with the unvaccinated. And so, you have to respect those politicians who are consistent and continue being consistent after a long period of time. because you get a lot of flack from powerful interests if you dare to defend health freedom. So Victoria, congratulations on working in such a great office.
Yes. Yeah. I think that if there were an algorithm that could calculate the effect of legislation to say, how many lives would this legislation have affected positively, that algorithm would show that had Congressman Posey's bill been enacted decades ago, that bill more than others would have helped Americans more than other bills, and it would have ranked him as one of the most important congressmen in our country's modern history.
And luckily, Greg, in that letter, whose link I put in chat, the letter asks for co-signers for the Posey letter, but it also mentions that given our broader concern about rubber stamping 72 doses of shots for kids, we do need the NICE Act from Mr. Gov't, which does include that requirement to publish the status of research on the unvaccinated. Isn't that correct, Greg?
That is correct. The NICE Act is the current version of the vax versus unvax study. It is the current version of protecting every American from mandatory vaccination. And it is the solution to the current predicament that we have. If the NICE Act passes, if Congressman Gohmert's bill passes, it means that you get to go to work, you get to go to school. You're not required to get vaccinated. And further, the top scientists in our country will report on the status of vax versus unvax science. And when I say top scientists, I mean the ones who are not conflicted, the ones who do not have pharma ties. And that means objective science. And I think science got us into this, and science can get us out of it. Good, genuine control group science is necessary. So a lot of the NICE Act that we just looked at is being in the right place at the right time, just like so many things in life. And my hope is that the NICE Act is now that it's in Congress, it's been introduced in Congress, it's in the right place. It's just waiting for the right time.
Yeah, and we're increasingly seeing articles about the skepticism that has exploded around COVID vaccination, extending to other vaccination, as folks wonder just how corrupt CDC is. They're seeing the rubber stamp process of approval, Pharma's overall capture of the agency. So yeah, the bill is the right solution, just building for that right time because it's comprehensive. So thank you, Victoria. Does anyone have any questions for Victoria or our campaign to get co-signers for the letter? Go ahead and click the raise hand icon you'll see under the reactions tab, or think of your questions, and we'll do more Q&A after the other topics. And Scott, I believe you have some topics and speakers and a question. You see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Thank you there. Yeah, I do have a question for Victoria, and that is, have you encountered a lot of strong opposition to any of your recent measures in Congress? People who have told you they're really against this, or anything like that is surfaced yet?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay, well, that's good. I was just wondering if it had come onto the radar screen enough to warrant, getting such attention from our opponents and the ones who want to control our health, even depopulate us. So it's just a matter of curiosity. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can comment on that. I would think that the powers that be that fund the agencies and the re-elections for the politicians would start to fight back once they started to worry that the effort was getting scale. As long as the co-sponsors of good health freedom bills are limited to the House Freedom Caucus, which is what's happening over the past year, they may not fight too hard against it. If you start getting, we have Congressman Duncan as a prime author of this letter. He's on the Energy and Commerce Committee. The top Republican on that committee is not friendly to health freedom. She's a Republican from Washington State. I'll let activists in that state, figure out who that is. and come election time in November, work with leadership to the extent they have connections there to ensure that the chairmen who end up running these committees are in fact friends of freedom and not rhinos or just placeholders. But whether the NICE Act gets a couple dozen co-sponsors, or the Posey, Gov't, Duncan letter gets a dozen or 2 dozen co-signers, maybe the powers that be might say something about it. I would think if I were in their shoes that they would want not to say as much about it, just to keep it quiet, ignore it. Isn't that what happens? You ignore somebody, then you belittle them, then denigrate them, then attack them, then you win. That's my guess. We're trying to just establish our rump group, get our friends in Congress educated, aggressive, and ready. And then, once that tipping point happens, whatever it is, we're the ones leading the charge.
Okay, thank you for that, Charlie. And it reminds me of when I was doing more of my practice of food and drug law during the last, 35, 40 years. I noticed a trend, which was, of course, that the FDA generally only attacked companies that were successful. If you didn't have a successful product, their attitude was, why bother? But if you had something that was wildly a success and that threatened the dominant paradigm of the pharmaceutical industry, then of course they were there first thing knocking on your door to get you to stop, throw you in jail if need be, or fine you.
Yeah, indeed. And that's kind of why we invited Diane Miller today, was to fight back with the infrastructure of safe harbors and standards of practice expansion efforts. And, you could comment if she's here, Diane, and introduce her. If she's not here, you could comment a bit about safe harbors, or we could stay with the COVID discussion. I see Marcia has a question, and then segue into the bioweapons comment from the invitation, Scott. Meanwhile, I think Marcia has her hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. And this may be addressed later on, but I just wanted to know what we can do to help get more co-signers for the Bill Posey bill and for the NICE Act. If there's anything we can do, the rest of us, can we get more co-signers by talking to our congresspersons and so on?
I would, if I might answer that, Marcia, in the link are all our campaigns. The top one at that link is the current campaign to stop the FDA. And it's made to be simple and usable by friends. So to the extent you have a network, I would suggest just sending this link or the link I posted earlier to your friends and just tell them, look, it takes a minute to scroll down to the bottom, input your zip code, and you're done. Because, folks don't like talking to politicians. Try to organize a lobby day in DC. It's like pulling teeth. But they'll send an email. They might not call, but they'll send an email, and that's really helpful. It's artillery in a battle. Get those emails blasted. Don't give these staffers an excuse not to know what you're talking about. And our letters are very good. I would say so myself. Lots of editing, lots of experience, lots of footnotes. We try to make it smooth reading. It's a bit aggressive at times, but we do really believe in health freedom. But I don't know, Greg, what do you think? That's my suggestion, to keep it easy. Get that link out there.
Yes, we're building a massive coalition right now of health freedom groups as well, and we are somewhere in the numbers of millions of Americans to tens of millions of Americans, and it's just growing. So I think that individuals who want to get involved, definitely start sharing the NHF Take Action link. And then you can also reach out to me if you'd like to get more active in reaching out.
Right. And I mentioned to Alex, our lawyer in Florida, Jeff Childers, Greg, you might want to contact him. He's a
Yeah.
he's a real go-getter.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great question, Marcia. Jay, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have consistently through these meetings pointed out my belief that a really strong emphasis should be on somehow stirring up, highlighting the profit motive behind so much of this. And it's such a peculiar thing in our society. I'm working to raise money to be able to do a project to really help wake up the idea of using investing in wealth for mankind's benefit and not just unbridled, narcissistic, psychopathic, unlimited greed into being worth billions and billions and just keep going. And we have this really peculiar conflict in our society where freedom and free enterprise and free markets is a real important thing. And yet the degree to which that ends up empowering the vaccine pharma people that are companies, but it's people, to have so much influence over legislators and what happens in every aspect of what's controlling all this. And I think that this worshiping of free enterprise, which has to be there, I mean, what's the alternative, makes so many of these people in government that we're trying to influence to help protect freedom, so many of them are genuinely blind. They are just religious believers that the pharma people, vaccine people are working in the public good and should be believed and trusted and supportive. And I think the more we can really highlight waking them up to think, just like with the public, think about the profit motives and the, again, motive and opportunity for them to be influencing so much of what's going on in the news and everywhere else, to help at least open their mind to then more objectively looking at the vital data that you're showing them and the legislation you're trying to bring about accordingly. How to do that, I don't know, but I think it's an incredibly powerful, vital part of this whole process.
I agree, Jay, and you've made that point, like you said, frequently at these meetings, and you deserve a better response each time. I know there are conflicts of interest disclosure requirements with scientific studies and elsewhere in the health market, but obviously it's not working. Scott, I'm sure, has thought about that over his time on the conflict of interest issue. Maybe Scott, do you want to comment? I see your hand raised as well.
Yes, thanks, Charlie. I just want to say that one thing that NHF has shied away from in the past is attacking the profit motive, because profit is really nothing but a tool. It's like a hammer or a saw. It tells you which way to invest your capital. It tells you if you're doing right with consumers or you're doing wrong with consumers. If you don't do well in pleasing consumers, you won't make any profit, and so on. So profit per se isn't, in my view, isn't the enemy. The enemy is greed. And so what NHF has emphasized is greed, whether it's greed for power, greed for money, that sort of thing. But profit per se, I mean, how can you tell what good you're doing in satisfying consumer needs without profit? When Ludwig von Mises in his book Socialism, which is pretty thick, and I actually had it autographed by him, but the main point out of that whole book, if you want to distill one point, is once socialism succeeds completely, it fails completely, because it has no free market mechanism to tell you where to direct your your energy and attention and your production efforts. They have no clue because it's all made up. The Soviet Union during its heyday, it had to look at Sears and Roebuck catalogs to decide what prices to assign to their washing machines, to their not their cars, I'm sorry, their refrigerators and that sort of thing, because they had no mechanism to say, this is how much it costs us to make this good, and we should charge so much on top of it. So, and with that, you get a lot of waste, a lot of ecological waste, a lot of misdirected resources into useless things, producing 1950s style dresses in, like horrible colors that no one wants because, well, that's what you were doing for 20 years. And so you just keep doing the same thing, or shoes that don't work, and shoddy goods and bad manufacturing practices and all of that. And you have really a waste of natural resources going into stupid production items. So it's really important to differentiate between profit and greed. And I just wanted to make that point. And that's what NHF has done over the years. We're anti-greed. We are not anti-profit. You need to make a profit to stay in business.
Can I please ask you to elaborate further, because this is such a key important thing. You and I have discussed this before. I've said a few times here, free market, free enterprise freedom is essential. I don't know how mankind evolves beyond the old historical models of the only choices being capitalism or socialism. We have to evolve. There has to be a newer, better model. But I mean, you don't allow drug dealers to bring heroin to the schoolyards in the name of profit. We, again, in our court system, we make people recuse themselves if they have any vested interest in the outcome. In criminal prosecutions, we look at motive and opportunity. There has to be, as much as we hate to say this, government has a role. And if you come out with something that's so vital for the well-being of the country in an emergency situation, the government will take control of it for national security. And maybe that's even sometimes a good thing, in wartime or what have you. We're in an emergency situation where they're forcing vaccines on people, limiting breathing capability, limiting employment, controlling lives, destroying the psychology of children. And nobody's highlighting the fact that 40% of the funding for the FDA is from the pharmaceutical industry that's being regulated. There's so much opportunity here, and it has zero to do with attacking the idea of profit. It's the idea of waking us up to the fact that this is a monstrosity, strangling civilization at this point, and it's being allowed to run unbridled. That's why I was talking about the Medical Conflicts of Interest Exposure and Disclosure Act. Let them make money, but if they're making money on vaccinations, they shouldn't be allowed to fund legislation and politicians and news that's going to censor anything that's on the other side of the argument and just promote their twisted view of data. There has to be a healthy balance here. So,
well, Jay, we actually agree in large part, and I'm not by any means positing a situation in which the corruption, you're really talking more about corruption than anything else. You're talking about a fascist type of system, a fascist type of economy where the corporations and the government work together hand in glove. And that's what we see today. If we were to go out and talk to the ordinary man or woman on the street and say, we have a fascist economy, they'd look at us like a nutcase, because that word has become so overused, it's trite these days, and it's actually a disadvantage to mention it. It's like calling someone a Nazi. Oh, everyone's a Nazi these days if you disagree with them. Or a racist now is the new code word if you disagree with them. But the point to be made here from what you've said, which I actually agree with in large part, is that we need to reduce down the size of government, because where does the pharmaceutical industry get its power? You know, Merck can't go up to you and hold a gun to your head and say, you're getting the vaccine now. No, they don't do that. If they did that, you'd call the police, they'd be thrown in jail, at least that particular person. And but they do it through the government. So through bribes and kickbacks and influence and running their own candidates whom they support and the like, they get people in office who pass laws or rules and regulations that then require us in turn to be mandated to take the vaccine. That's not a free enterprise problem or a free market problem. That is a government problem. And I've always held for more than 50 years that the best government is the government that rules the least, and you want to decentralize everything. Why did America become so powerful and so impressive? Was it because of all our natural resources and all of that? Well, that was part of it, but it was because we had a decentralized government and people were free to do what they could do to improve their own lots. And in doing so, they improved the lots of everyone around them. Not everyone. There are always bad actors in anything. I don't care what system you have. There will always be bad actors. You'll never get that Marxian paradise of perfect people. People are human. They're bad actors, they're good actors, all of that. What your goal should be is not to eliminate them 100%, because in doing so, you'll create tyranny. But your goal should be to minimize them. And what minimizes bad actors the best? It's a free market system where people are free to achieve their goals of satisfying the goods of the greatest number of people out there. And if they don't, they're taken down. Those companies go out of business. If they don't stay up with the times and satisfy the needs of the consumers, they're history. But if they're supported, as the pharmaceutical industry is, by government thugs, and that's all they are, they're just thugs with guns who mandate that we have to buy their product and use their control, informational dominance, use their control of the mainstream media to convince a lot of people that this is exactly what they need, then they're going to go out and do that. And we have to deconstruct all of that, because there's a big superstructure out there that a lot of people believe in, like they believe in, like people believe in God. I mean, to them, it's a secular God that's out there. But, you know, the people who go into politics, they put on their trousers one leg at a time, just like everyone else. They have their own personal interests, just like everyone else. They aren't somehow knighted as saints or godly people just because they've been elected to office or appointed to office or anything like that. And that's what we need to keep in mind through all of this, is that these are very imperfect people. And in fact, they're more likely to be imperfect people, because what attracts power like a magnet are psychopaths and sociopaths. Those are the ones who are attracted to power. It's not ordinary people typically. I mean, some are, but it's psychopaths. So we tend to have psychopaths rising to the top, and that's who runs and rules everyone. So we've got to do something to stop that. And when I talk about the bioweapons labs, that's just proof of the pudding right there as to what's going on today. And it's an existential crisis that threatens the lives of everyone on this planet. Anyway, that's all I want to say on that.
Let me make a final comment, and then I'll drop myself out of this dialogue. I think we're in very dangerous territory here. I think being stuck in the past, that the only choices are capitalism, socialism, and communism, is a recipe for disaster. The idea that you're referring to psychopaths looking for power, my God, the fact that that applies to people in government, to me, is a tiny microcosm of the people that are profiting on vaccines and pharma. We have antitrust laws. There's a point at which simply pointing out to legislators that the profit drives of these psychopaths that are having incredible power over news, over science, over studies, over medical institutions, over legislation, should be at least perceived for what they are, so that the legislators take the data we're showing them as more of an open-minded thing to be evaluated and not give so much credence to how much the public mind is influenced by, I mean, it's not just corruption. This is what's so bizarre. Our current economic culture says it is their fiduciary responsibility as people running vaccine and pharma companies to do everything they can to influence the news, influence what's taught in school, what's taught in medical school, and
Hey,
legislate.
that's all part and parcel of having this huge government that can dictate every aspect of your life. And that's what we need to get rid of. So if you don't have that, that is the problem. And don't use the word capitalism. That's a Marxist pejorative term. It's really a free market system that we're looking for, not capitalism. You can have state capitalism, which is what we really have right now. You could have crony capitalism, which is also another aspect of what we have right now. I'm talking about a free market. That's a real term that tells you what is really going on with that economic system, and that is a voluntary exchange between people. If I agree with you to buy your car for $500 and you agree, then we've had a voluntary exchange. No one has a gun to the other person's head. And again, nothing's perfect. There will be bad actors in free market systems, just as there will be in others. It'll just be less, because if they don't perform, they'll get knocked out of business. And just look at IBM. IBM's a shadow of its former self, and yet back in the 60s and 70s, that was the be all and end all of computers. There's no such thing as Microsoft or Apple or anything like that. And they came up and knocked IBM out of the marketplace for the most part. So I agree with a lot of what you say. It's just that the underlying thread of what's causing the problem is the fact that we have all these big government institutions with a lot of power over our lives that shouldn't even be there. And if they weren't there, the pharmaceutical industry couldn't do the harm that it's doing right now. It could go out and make its arguments. It could go out and say, this vaccine, this COVID-19 vaccine is the best thing since sliced bread. But if it started killing people and you went into court and sued them for the harm, they'd be out of business so fast it'd make your head spin.
All right.
And that's what we need. That's what we need. We need to have everyone subject to free market mechanisms that allows them to live or die according to whether they cause harm or good to people. And again, I want to emphasize, it won't be perfect. I'm not saying get rid of all laws about that, because that won't happen. But we need to make a trend or a move to this and get away from the godlike complex that's been bestowed on government and government agencies, all these alphabet agencies that are doing so much harm to so many people, thanks to their little crony connections with pharmaceutical industry and vaccine makers and the AMA and all these monopolistic organizations. And that's what we need to get rid of. Then the question is, how do we do that? And I think one way is the steps that Greg Glaser's taken with the NICE Act, and that NHF has taken, and that Charlie and Alex are pursuing. And thanks to people like Victoria and Diane Miller, I see she's here now, and her organization are doing. I mean, we have a shot at it, but we've got to all be strong and be persistent and not be discouraged.
And we are under time deadline, Scott. So if you want to cover the last two topics, biolabs, and maybe you want to let Diane talk about pushing back for natural healers by expanding safe harbors and an expanded idea of scope of practice and whatever else she wants to talk about. You must go back with Diane a long way, Scott.
Yes, absolutely. And she's one of the Health Freedom Heroes. In fact, we gave her an award not too long ago for being Health Freedom Hero of the Year from NHF. And so it's really nice to see Diane again. And she has been really the same way that NHF is kind of the leader in codex, Diane Miller and her organization are leaders in the Safe Harbor Acts that have been enacted thanks to them and others throughout the country to protect natural practitioners. But she can tell the story far better than I can.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to be here. It's great to have such an in-depth conversation about freedom. Sorry, I'm under the weather today, but I'm doing good. You know, our organization, National Health Freedom Action and Coalition, really work for these safe harbors to make sure that you have access to the healers that you want, whether they're licensed or unlicensed, holistic licensed healers and unlicensed healers and whoever you want. And part of that process is taking regular people that are healing each other out of the public domain. I mean, out of the regulatory system, and keep them in the public domain. That's been a really interesting battle for 20 years because, you know, the people in the legislature are so used to regulation. They think that's the end all and be all, and they don't really trust that people can be on their own and make decisions. So the Safe Harbor Acts that have been passed now in 11 states are really a big project that we have. Currently, the other big project that we have is the righttorefuse.org website. We gathered together a bunch of national leaders on the vaccine COVID issues, and we set up a website and hired attorneys to track all of the legislation in the United States that we thought was protecting our personal rights to autonomy, bodily autonomy. So we tracked maybe 600 bills all the way through. There's still a lot on the website. A lot of sessions are still open. We did not put bills that we oppose on the website. They're just bills that we would support. And in that process of discussing what kind of bills do we support and what kind of legislators are we supporting, that conversation, like we support people don't have to mask, we support, you know, no forced vaccines, no coercion. But one of the things in the right to refuse conversation is that, yes, we do have the right, like Scott said, somebody's not going to hold you down in the middle of the street and inject a vaccine, hopefully, into your arm and without getting arrested. But the coercion piece is so big, and whether it's financial coercion, religious coercion, I mean, there's so many ways that they coerce people out of their human rights by propaganda. And I think that the relationships that we have with state legislators, I don't know why, but well, I do know why, but I think states are a very powerful piece to the survival of the United States. And if we're going to make it through, these states have the power to make laws that say, hey, we won't take your money if, or we won't, we can't coerce people into this, or this is a human right, it's a fundamental right, requires strict scrutiny. So getting those kinds of laws passed, and I think 24 states have really, on the Right to Refuse website, you'll see all the states that have passed pretty good laws. They're unique. I mean, they're taking little pieces of the puzzle and trying to inch our way to, you know, protecting human autonomy. But I think that it's kind of like planting seeds. You start at the very ground level, and you say, can you convince a legislator that you have a bodily autonomy to not be coerced by money, you know? And can you convince a regular state legislator that, you know, taking your job away if you don't get vaccinated is affecting your human rights? And so that the relationship that people have with each other and using that to promote the concepts that our country was founded on. I mean, we really are the last holdout for having the semblance of a structure that could be turned around. I mean, we don't know if we're going to be able to turn things around, but I really think it's the one, inch by inch, row by row. It's like each relationship that our warriors have on the ground with their agency people, with their state legislators, is the only, in my opinion, hope that we have to get a groundswell enough to change things. So we, of course, the media is not covering all the bills that have passed on the state level. They don't want you to know anything that's happening positive. So if the rightttorefuse.org site is there to let people know there has been progress. Listening to the hearings, very, very informative. I mean, you'll have legislators telling people they're crazy or they should be murdered if they don't get a vaccine or whatever. But you also have legislators going the other way saying this is absolutely stupid that we're doing this. And watching some of the cases going forward, the media never carries the positive cases. But look at the Navy SEALs. I mean, the judge said this is a theater. Why aren't you giving people, the right to religious exemption? So, one of the things we're trying to do is show people the good things that are happening and how those relationships really do matter, and that every single American right now is a warrior, is enlisted in having conversations that save our country.
Diane, Charlie Frohman here. As I told Scott, it's been nice meeting you over the past couple of weeks on learning more about your leadership in safe harbors. Do you want to mention the other elements that you've worked on that's very intriguing, I think, for natural health folks, especially as we seek more integrated care in our health plans? And that's the expanded scope of practice idea. And I've spoken with doctors who say we lose sleep at night over liability if we go outside our scope of practice. And then on the other hand, we see the frontline doctors getting persecuted by the licensing boards if they dare to treat early off-label. How important is that in your mind, the scope of practice and expanding that idea?
Thanks, Charles. And also, I'm glad to be conversing with you in the last couple of weeks. Scope of practice is the term that defines what docs and all the practitioners can do. And that is very broad. So you can't go out of your scope of practice because doctors can do anything they want to you, pretty much, as long as it's for your benefit. But they can go out of their standard of care. And so the standard of care issue is probably the biggest thing that's governing our country right now. The pharmaceuticals and the agencies have captured and tried to dictate what the standard of care is, whereas the standard of cares of patients are practitioners are generally thought to come from the research community and the academic community and the regular things that doctors believe are helpful to patients. So what happens is that they have the law that you can't go out of the standards of care. If you treat diabetes, as 3 doses a day, that's fine. If you treat diabetes as 1 dose a day, but use a different drug, that's fine. So there's a lot of standards of care. But if you go outside of those generally accepted minimal standards of care, then you're in big trouble. And so the battle on the vaccine courts has really been instrumental in fleshing that out, because some states have passed laws to allow doctors to use conventional medicine, unconventional or alternative medicine. But at the end of that statute, it says, as long as you stay in the standard of care. Well, that's stupid. So the legislators have not passed a bill that will allow someone to go out of that standard of care, even if it's a different kind of a minority standard of care. California came closest with their Lyme's disease CAM bill for licensed practitioners, and it was just used in a vaccine case. And it lost because they didn't abide by the restrictions that the complementary and alternative healthcare bill had required. So how to draft the laws that allow licensed people to go out of their conventional standards of care is really important. And those laws were not properly drafted and passed in the 27 states that passed them, and do not allow people to go outside of that. So I drafted a model act for expanded practices. I call it Expanded Practices Act, where you can go out of the standards of care of conventional medicine as long as it's not more dangerous than it would be if you went with conventional medicine. So, and you told the client they're going to veer off of there. So we introduced that in Minnesota in 2006, but we didn't have a team to move it. And I just got overwhelmed with the safe harbor and other things. So I didn't spend any more time on that, but I have been consulted on some of the bills that have, or cases that have gone forward on this. It's really an important because right now you'll see, like in California, the agencies are, the legislators are saying the agency decides the standards of care of doctors. They say, if you don't abide by the CDC or the ACIP or whatever, you get they pull your license. And that's just not okay for, we have 400 federal agencies right now. I mean, the agencies are running the country, and these agencies are powered by the money. And so of the pharmaceutical companies. So the real power that we have is a state legislator can actually pass a law that says a doctor can go outside of their standards of care. It'll freak them out. It has to be done. We have to do that. Somebody's got to do that.
I'm inspired by that, Scott, that goal right there. What's more important, safe harbors or expanded practices of act, or are they both important in different ways?
Yeah, they're definitely important in different ways. I think the Safe Harbor Acts is really a human rights act. It's taking regular people out of the regulatory system for healing each other. There's trillions of regular healers that are born healers, and they're helping each other. They're herbalists, naturopaths, homeopaths, all these people that help each other. And the Safe Harbor really helps people heal each other without getting afraid. But the Licensing Act is the big money issue right now. I mean, those ivermectin off-label use drugs, all of those things, they couldn't touch these people if the state governments were passing expanded practice acts, because they're highly educated people. They should be able to make decisions much more than an agency about who's in front of them and what's best for them.
Wow. Scott, any follow-up on that?
No, I think Diane covered it really, really well in the small amount of time that she had. And I have to say, NHF really appreciates the efforts of her and her organization in pushing the safe harbor. We learned our lesson the hard way because in the 50s and 60s, NHF pushed licensing of chiropractors to get them out from under the thumb of the American Medical Association and state medical boards, and we were successful. The only problem with that licensing approach is then it created its own little bureaucracy in the chiropractic industry, and they created their own standards of care. And if a chiropractor deviated from that standard of care, then they got into trouble with their own state board. So it just sort of kicked the can down the road, and it was a lesson we learned. And so we turned towards the kind of approach that Diane has made and the like, which is a Safe Harbor Act, which doesn't create a bureaucracy, but creates literally a safe harbor for any practitioner who's not harming people and not practicing medicine to go into and be covered by.
Yes, indeed. Knowing the time, Scott, how do you want to proceed with the final topic?
Sure, and I can be quicker about it since I kind of cost some time earlier with the discussion. So basically, I just want wanted to say, and it's a little bit of a follow-on from what I was talking about at the last meeting in March, and that is that we are really today facing a very existential crisis with these bioweapons labs. You know, the United States is the leading bioweapons lab researcher, if I can call it that, euphemistically call it that. In the world, we have, the US has 13,000 scientists working in a large number of bioweapons labs, at least 6 of which were in Ukraine before they were taken out by Russian missile strikes. And quite honestly, whatever one's feelings on the Russian versus Ukraine war, I frankly think the Russians did us a huge service by taking out those bioweapons labs because they're criminal. There's actually a US law, 18 US Code, Section 175, that prohibits work on or holding biological weapons products. And you can look it up and see. The problem is that, you know, when I was growing up and there was the risk of nuclear war, we all thought, oh, that's the worst, at least at the time, that's the worst thing that could happen to us. But now I see these literally, I mean, think about the people who are in charge of the pharmaceutical industry today and multiply that kind of stupidity times 100, and you get an idea of the kind of people who are working in these labs. I mean, they're careless. Even if they aren't deliberately making biological weapons, they're making gain of function advancements on either harmless or near harmless, certainly less fatal, viruses and bugs, and making them more harmful to humans. What purpose could that possibly serve? Now, supposedly they are saying that this is to protect us against those other countries who are doing bioweapons research and will attack the United States and its citizens and all of that. But in fact, we see it's the US that is doing the worst part of all of this. They've been engaged in massive biological warfare programs since at least the early 1940s, and it's only accelerated. Even Lyme disease came from a bioweapons research on Plum Island and right off of Long Island and off the coast, opposite the coast of Connecticut. And that's where Lyme disease came from. They were throwing out their failed experiments out in the open. Seabirds and land birds were coming over and pecking at the garbage because it was attractive to them. And then they'd fly away to Connecticut and other parts of Long Island. And Lyme was something like, what, 19 miles away from this as the crow flies? And that's where Lyme disease came from. If you want to read more about it, you can read a very well-researched book called Lab 257 that documents this. And it's the same thing with a lot of these other things. I mean, you even have the mad scientists in Brazil who were hybridizing killer bees with regular native honeybees, and they created a super race of killer bees that is now a danger to people all the way from Brazil up into America, even approaching Canada now. So we have to rein in these mad crackpot scientists somehow. And one way to do it is probably to start a campaign to enforce 18 US Code 175. But the problem is that there is an exclusion there that says if it's just for bona fide research or other peaceful purposes. So that has not been adequately defined. And what we see is a lot of people like our dear Dr. Anthony Fauci hiding behind that exclusion. And so probably the best thing is, as Gary Barnett suggested, we need to do, I think it was him who said that, we need to extend this prohibition to BSL labs levels 3 and 4. And if we do that, that would have stopped the COVID virus from having been developed by the NIH and the Wuhan research labs. And it's very clear now, especially if you listen to Dr. Malone and Judy Mikovits, that there is no way that the COVID-19 virus was naturally occurring, or it came from definite bioengineering work, research that was done. So we need to stop any research being done at levels 3 and 4, because it's going to create kind of it could possibly and most probably create a 12 monkeys type scenario where we literally wipe out the human race. And there are a lot of people who think that's exactly their goal. And I promise you that all the work that we've made in exposing the COVID-19 virus, it will be nothing as compared to the next one. The survival rate for the COVID-19 virus, as NHF pointed out in 2019, was about 99.5% at least, the survival rate. But what they'll do next is bring out, after having pioneered all of this with Zika virus, with the COVID-19, is they will come out with a Marburg virus, for example. The fatality rate for the Marburg virus is 88%. They'll probably attenuate it because they don't want to kill themselves. And so they'll probably attenuate it and have some sort of antidote for themselves, but they'll release that. And then people will stampede for the protection of the government and the protection of the vaccines that the pharmaceutical industry will offer. And we'll be fighting the same battle that we did for the last 2 years. We'll be fighting it again. And it'll be tougher to win because of the fear of everyone out there. You know, the old saying is that war is the health of the state. The governments grow when there's war. Well, this would also be just like that. It would be a war. And we would see vaccine mandates, very dangerous vaccines. They'll be rushed into production, will kill people off, and definitely at least harm them. So we need to stop this research from being done. We can't trust these people, and we need to bring to justice the scientists and the other enablers who have made this happen. And so this is one of the campaigns that NHF is launching, and we need allies to do this, because this is the existential threat that we face right now and will face again until we put some of these people into prison. And it says in Title 18, Section 175, they can get 10 years to life in prison, amongst other punishment. So we need to start pushing that, or our own lives are at risk. And they will be, because this is going to happen again. They aren't stopping with COVID-19 and everything's going back to normal. This is a fight to the death, and we need to recognize it now, or we won't be around. That's all I have to say on that. Hey, I sound like Forrest Gump, don't I? And that's all I have to say on that.
Greg, I saw your hand up a while ago, but if anyone wants to comment, feel free. I know we're running out of time here.
I would love to make a comment and say thank you so much, Scott, for that overview. And it is exactly what's happening and exactly what we need to do. I have one small comment, and this is about the attitude towards our culture in terms of changing or modifying resources. So I have a grandson who's in school, and they took a bacteria and they taught them how to change that bacteria so that it would become fluorescent. So they changed the DNA structure of that bacteria. There was no conversation in that classroom about the ethics of that, about whether it's okay to do that. And I think that the culture itself is okay with modifications. They're okay with genetic modifications. They're, you know, so that the regular people of the world, they are okay with that research. Like they have that exemption in there for research. And that is, where does research go? I mean, research always gets implemented. So I totally agree with you. That has to be changed. The modifications, for good or bad, is a moral dilemma for the human race and should be taken just like you wouldn't teach a child how to become radioactive in the classroom. Nuclear power is a modification. And I think that can be talked about at the legislature with state legislators. That can be saying, we don't want a lab in our state. We don't want, you know, even if you can't change that federal law, we can start banning these labs, period, you know, to exist.
Thank you. I agree, Diane. Thanks.
Got to see Greg Glaser had a chat. Does he want to bravely vocalize his written comment?
Sure. Yeah, the extraordinary character of these threats, how we are receiving these threats today as the heirs of traditional people. We're pastoral people. Our ancestors are farmers. And now here we are thrust in the middle of a technological world. There's things like nanotechnology, nuclear was highlighted. There's underground bases. I mean, the extent of the technological threats is so deep that our traditional farmer thinking doesn't necessarily equate to a solution. And so it seems to me rational that at this juncture, we really need to come together as humanity and have a technological solution to these technological problems. In other words, you know, I don't think it's going to be farmers that solve the nuclear stockpile problem and weaponized bioweapons and things like that. However, I do think farmers will be part of the solution. Diane correctly highlighted that experimenting on people is a key problem, and I think that what the future looks like, the beautiful future looks like, is it looks like transparency in government, where we have a real-time transparency. None of these crazy FOIA requests. I have to send a FOIA request, maybe I get a response. I think that we have to change that, where there's a real-time transparency in government, a real-time transparency even in military and bioweapons labs and stuff like that. I think that there shouldn't even be bioweapons labs. And I think transparency would fix that. And, you know, we started off this conversation with checks and balances. And I think that's what it comes back to. A beautiful future looks like one which has inherent checks and balances, free markets that stop the bad actors, free speech that allows the competition of ideas, and transparency, real-time transparency in government that stops the psychos from living out in secret what they want to do. And when that happens, when we have that transparency, I think what we would also find is we don't experiment on people, and we do have clear laws that protect clean air and clean water, because we can deal as a society, we can deal with a lot of issues that come up, a lot of problems, but if we don't have clean air, clean water, and clean land, that's it, that's game over. And so I think what we're doing as a society is coming to terms with technology. This is the technological age, and we are the farmers, we're the heirs, and we're trying to reconcile these two worlds.
I like that summation. Alex, should we invite Scott to say goodbye, or invite anyone else to do a last minute question or comment?
Yeah, sounds good.
Greg Cunin.
Well, I just wanted to say, because I was going to say this earlier, a lot of these problems seem that we could overcome them if we just had a level playing field. As somebody who's bridged these two worlds, I make a product that saves people's lives, and I've been associated with the orthomolecular movement since the very beginning. I am not allowed to exercise truly my First Amendment right. It's the only industry I know where if you make dietary supplements, your rights are abridged. And a lot of this seems to come down to the Constitution, at least in this country. if we actually had constitutional freedoms to be able to speak and share this information, we would be able to wake people up. And it's very frustrating when I see companies that basically control communication in the United States through these so-called open platforms that have been given protection. And God forbid you make a statement that they don't agree with, and you're going to lose your ability to communicate with anyone under these circumstances. As far as I'm concerned, Facebook, Twitter has been in violation of the U.S. Constitution, and to me, that's where we have to start, because ultimately, I think when this information is shared with people, they all of a sudden question the narrative that they've been told. That's it.
Alex, you want to invite Scott to say goodbye?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, sounds good, he says as he looks down. Okay, I wanted to thank both you, Charlie, and Alex for having put this whole event together, and everyone else for having attended. We had a pretty good turnout, and more by way of participation than anything else. And in fact, it's very important to look at the chat line, because there are a lot of comments that people didn't make verbally, but they did in writing, that are in the chat line and should be read if you can. But I think once we end this meeting, people won't have an opportunity to do that anymore. But I especially want to thank Diane and Greg, both of you, and Victoria, actually. I think Victoria is no longer on, but for all the efforts you're doing to get legislation passed to make things more transparent and make a more, as Greg said, a level playing field. And that's the important thing that we can do here today. But let's all stay in touch. And I want to invite you all, if you haven't already, to sign up on as a member of NHF and help support our work here and elsewhere. We have a Codex meeting coming up on contaminants in food, and we're really the only ones speaking out consistently at those meetings, and they're all held by Zoom now. So they aren't in-person meetings, don't have to fly to China or to Berlin or to Rome or wherever it might be held. So that's kind of an advantage. It certainly saves us money. But think about joining as a member, please. It's one thing to be on our e-list. It's another to actually be a member and put your money where your mouth is. So anyway, and if you do, you get the magazine that Greg showed at the very beginning that comes out 4 times a year. Anyway, thank you all. One last
thing,
comment,
Scott.
Greg. We're still waiting on articles from your father to put in the magazine. So please send them to me, okay?
Okay, I'll work on that.
One thing, Alex,
Okay.
Sorry, Scott, in the chat.
No,
Danielle,
I'm done. Thank you.
Daniela mentioned Jack wanted to say something. Jack, if you're still there, we'll make a last minute comment. Going once, Jack, going twice.
Here we go. I couldn't figure out the mute. It's been a long night. At the end of the day, this meeting was spectacular from a perspective of what we can actually do to make things happen. And Diane's right. If we don't deal from a state-focused perspective to change laws, it ain't going to happen. And it begins with social media. Greg Cunnion's right. We've got to nail those people with facts, and we have to have the courage to do that. I read a letter from a very Christian man to a congressman yesterday that they included me in. And he actually told a congressman point blank, don't do things that go against the Constitution of the United States, or I will show up at your door and kill you. That is where we're heading if we don't start following Greg Glaser type thinking and dealing, and Diane Miller and supporting them. And I want to keep it really brief. Scott Tips just hit the home run, and I try to do this every meeting I can get to here. At the end of the day, become members immediately after this is over. Don't hesitate. Don't think about it. This is Easter week. Share the blessing of a rare grace of putting your money where your mouth is. And at the end of the day, I beg each of you, give the gift of an invitation to your two best friends this week. I asked God, I say, you know, my speech is the work that what I deliver globally and in relationship to how dealing here and now starting to put into effect the fundraising sides of my responsibilities based on agreements being done. And so that there's no legal ramifications. I can tell you this, we're going to blow up economically, but we're only going to blow up economically if the fire begins right here. It has to begin right here and it has to be grassroots. And you have to say, okay, I'm becoming a member. Okay, corporate members. I don't know how many people here own a corporation, but you can deduct the $200 deduction to become a member. Set a goal, 1 person a week, 2 persons a week. You're bringing someone to the table of NHF. You're supplying them the insights and the information they need to understand the value we bring and the microcosm we are in relationship to the dearth of problems we deal with globally in over 207 countries. Okay. And our focus here on the United States, which leads it all. We lead it all by example. So I beg each and every one of you, if you're not a member, to become a member this Easter weekend. To set a goal where you're delivering NHF to 1 or 2 of your best friends and grow that baby over, say, the next year. Every week, I'm going to discuss NHF with someone I love and care for. Thank you very much. Happy Easter to everyone. God bless each and every one of you. We represent the future. If we go into action in a grassroots, petri dish type perspective, let's get talking about it and let's get writing our little checks. They all add up at the end of the day.
Thank you, Jack. Happy Good Friday and happy Easter weekend, everybody. And mark your calendar right now for our May Zoom, which will be May 20th at noon Eastern time. And please invite your friends to join that as well. Any last comments, Charlie?
No,
I
this
can't
is
make
great.
that meeting. I'm going to be in surgery. I would ask everyone to say a prayer for me on the 20th.
And like you mentioned,
Well-
Charlie, I will upload this video to our YouTube channel. And I also recently started a Rumble, which has the interview I did of Foster Gamble on there on our NHF Rumble. And then also March's Zoom meeting is on there. So we're actually getting a few more views on Rumble than our YouTube, which is interesting.
Yeah, YouTube doesn't like us. They don't like health
Not
freedom,
at all.
period.
But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for your time today and for your creativity and your input. And I'm so grateful for my dear colleagues.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye now.
See ya. Aloha.